Hello, I'm Tori Watson, and you're very welcome to today's Youth Talks Back event with Féile's Youth Arts Project and the Active Communities Network. This event is part of this year's special online virtual Féile and is brought to you in partnership by Féile and Phobail with St Mary's University College and the Irish News. Today we're discussing mental health, and it's something that affects each and every one of us, our families and our friends. And it's fair to say that the impact of COVID-19 over the last few months has shown just how important it is to be aware of our mental health. During lockdown, the Active Communities Network has spoken to young people from North and West Belfast to understand the main issues and concerns they've had throughout this period. They've used that information to put together some questions for today's panellists. And I'm joined by Órlaithí Flynn, the Sinn Féin MLA for West Belfast, Mike Nesbitt, the Ulster Unionist MLA for Strangford, and former Antrim goalkeeper Chris Kerr. Before we get stuck into the questions, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to outline their own personal experience with mental health. So Mike, can I start with you?
Yeah, I suppose there are four things in my life. One, when I was a teenager, we had a family linen business that was blowing up. Dad was 49 at the time, and I think in that moment, every certainty in his life disappeared, but all the responsibilities remained in terms of a wife, children, car, family. And that's what got me interested in the human cost of conflict, because it hit him very badly. Then about 20 odd years ago, my wife had a very serious incident of poor mental health. And there I was as a partner living through that. Then as a victims commissioner, it's clear that one of the really most toxic legacies of the Troubles is a legacy of poor mental health, which goes on intergenerationally and is very widespread. And I think per capita, we have one of the worst rates on planet Earth. And it is a 21st century problem compounded by the legacy. And finally, I suppose it's being a politician and campaigning with people like Órlaithí to try and raise awareness of the problem, which I think we've now achieved. But the second part of that is the action plan. And that we have not completed yet, but we are, I think, at least on the starting line and perhaps a little bit over the starting line. So I suppose there are four areas that have impacted me and have fired my enthusiasm for tackling poor mental health.
And quite wide-ranging as well. And you mentioned Órlaithí. I think that's a great place to bring you in. Órlaithí, what's your experience with mental health?
Yeah, well, I suppose Mike's actually already covered some of the big overarching issues that face us as a society, and I don't think it'll be news to anyone out there that we know that mental illness is actually the largest cause of ill health here in the North. I think which speaks volumes, and I think it makes it quite obvious that I suppose having mental health problems and you know, we're all impacted by it, and I don't think there's anybody that'll be watching this debate that won't have experienced some form of mental ill health or mental problems throughout the span of their life, because it's totally normal. It's the same as we all have physical health, we all have mental health. So I think everyone will have their own experiences of when you've been at that time in your life when whether it's just been feeling low, feeling depressed at whatever level, we've all felt that. But I suppose for me, it's been a complete privilege from I took on the role as a West Belfast MLA. I also took up the position as the Sinn Féin spokesperson for mental health, suicide prevention and drug and alcohol addiction. And obviously all of those themes are all interlinked. But as Mike says, I have to say there's been some great partnership working up at Stormont in my past 3 years being an MLA. And I know that Mike and his colleague Robbie Butler sit on the suicide prevention all-party group, along with members of all the other political parties. And I think it's just been an honour to work together with everyone to try and tackle this huge and complex issue.
It's interesting to hear there's been a lot of cross-party work in that area. Last but not least, Chris, can you tell us a little bit of your experience?
Yeah, no pressure, obviously. Trying to speak after those two. Mine's probably a bit different. My mental health was affected after the passing of my dad in 2013. So again, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I think from the off, you go through sort of a roller coaster of seeing ups and downs, and then reacting well to treatment, having good days, bad days, and then he eventually passed away. And I think, for so long, I was letting it build up inside. I was pretending I was okay, and for anyone that sort of knows me, within a sporting context, is I'm always the loudest person in the room, typical goalkeeper, messing, joking, but I was able to portray that still in a team environment. But the issue for me was when I went home and closed the door behind. So I kept it building up for so long that it got to a stage where I was contemplating not wanting to be here anymore. So I wanted to do something about it, and I eventually went and got the help that I needed. And from there, the last few years now, I've been speaking about it because I think in particular males in West and North Belfast that I would know and affiliated with through sporting teams have a real issue about opening up and seeking help. So I suppose why I decided to do it was that if someone could see me going and getting help, saying, do you know what, he went and done it and has come out the other side of it. Most people either have or will lose a parent at some stage. So I think a lot of people can or will relate to it. So that was my thinking and my behind going public about it.
It's a very personal experience as well. And I think that leads us quite well into our first question from the young people who contributed to the consultation with ACN. So the first question comes from Dylan McGill. They ask, what effect has lockdown had on you and your mental health? And also, do you think it's affected young people differently? Órlaithí, I might start with you on that one.
Yes, no problem. And it's quite a difficult question to answer because I think we're all still, struggling. We're all still coming out of the lockdown and coming through it. And even with all that aside, it's still very difficult to tell what the effects of the lockdown have been or will be. But I know just me personally, and I'm sure everyone felt the same, but when you became closed off almost within your own home, when you couldn't see your family and your close friends, you had to build those connections through, your mobile phone, through telephone conversations, through, the FaceTime on the internet. And all that was big change for everybody, and everyone was experiencing that change at the same time. But then, of course, everyone has different living situations. Even something as simple as having internet access, that was one of the issues that I was dealing with as a local MLA from some of our constituents and wider afield. Some of those things that you took for granted, not everyone had that connectivity throughout the lockdown. So I think that people probably tried to make the best of a bad and a difficult situation. And I think that people did try their best and done really well, extremely well, when you look at how we're coming through the pandemic. But I think with the impact, particularly on our young people, as I said, it is hard to judge. But even as an adult, I found it difficult for me personally. So and whenever I look at some of the younger members within my family and, school children, for example, this has never happened before where we have had this period of time where children were unable to attend school. They were taken out of that daily routine. They couldn't interact with friends or their teachers. Their schoolwork then took on a different sort of, format.
All things you kind of tend to take for granted on a daily, day-to-day basis in normal times.
That's exactly it. And I'll finish on this because the issues facing our young people and mental health were already previously highlighted. And Mike had said it earlier, it's been great because the whole taboo around mental health, it is coming to the fore now. But the Children's Commissioner done a report, I think it was in 2018, the Still Waiting report. And there was also the report from the NI Youth Forum, the elephant in the room. And the issues that they were looking at was that we already knew pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, that young people were taking too long to speak up about how they were feeling. And young people, it was also taking too long to get them the help that they needed. So, that does worry. I am worried for our young people as we emerge out of lockdown. But even today, for any of the young people that's watching this discussion, I would just want to give them a wee message of reassurance that, you know, there is help out there, there is support out there. Chris sharing his story about him speaking up. And just to finish then on that report, that Nikki report, we have actually seen progress on that. And the health minister did set up an interdepartmental working group who are actually working on all those recommendations. So even if that's, you know, just sort of a wee shining light of hope for any young person out there that might need that help or that wants services to improve, that piece of work is ongoing.
Chris, I know you talked about that, you know, about going and accessing help. Why do you think young people may be, as Órlaithí says, a bit more hesitant to go and find those services or make use of them?
It's probably more, you know, they see it as a sign of weakness, you know, in a group of friends or, you know, I could only speak from, you know, my own experience, even, you know, in a team environment, you know, a sort of male dominant changing room, you know, it wasn't really the thing to do. I think, as Meg and Órlaithí have touched on, you know, it definitely, you know, more awareness has been raised around it.
Do you think they're difficult questions to have? Or the difficult conversations to have? I mean, sometimes when you say to your friend, you know, how are you? Like, how are you doing? It's just like, oh, I'm great. You know, and it's a very simple one. But do you think lockdown has maybe changed that when people now ask that question, how are you? It's a maybe fuller question of like, how are you mentally? How are you physically? How are things? I don't know. What do you think?
And that's the way it should be. You know, we're quick enough, even in a sporting context, to speak. But I know I'm quite quick to yap about physical injuries, and you know, anyone that'll listen, I'll tell them about it. But you know, it should be the same about, you know, mental health problems. You know, if in terms of like playing sport, if you're not feeling well between your ears, so to speak, you're not going to be able to play or perform, and that, you know, people will pick up on that. So I think, you know, I've always said, even the sporting teams, you know, take it easy on, like, you know, coaches, because a kid could go to training and, you know, that could be their escape, getting away for an hour, and if they make a mistake and someone berates them, that could be the thing that, you know, tips them over the edge or put them in a worse sort of predicament. So it's difficult. You know, I found it hard myself, even, you know, being used to being in an office too, and work, interacting with your workmates, you know, having the crack, you know, at lunchtime, break time, and even within a changing room as well. You know, you're used to meeting 30 plus of your friends a couple of times a week, and then that sort of was taken away. So it was just trying to readjust and just put things in place that, you know, it just keep plugging away and keep positive, and you know, eventually it will come, and it, you know, as we're starting to emerge out of it, you can see that. How
did you find that you could see an immediate effect during, you know, from pre-lockdown to lockdown in terms of your mental health, or were things kind of steady? Were you able to identify potential problem areas, or how did you cope with that?
No, I was okay straight away, as long as, you know, I was sort of thinking, as long as, you know, my friends, family are all well, and everyone's looking after themselves, and, you know, abiding to what we're being told to do, and you know, keep our distance, and, you know, all the sort of things that the government had put into place that we had to adhere to. So I think initially it was just more of a shock to the system than all the things being restricted that we're used to doing. But, you know, throughout it, I was okay, staying positive, exercising as much as I could, and then just hoping and that days like this weren't far away.
Yeah. What about you, Mike? What impact did you find, you know, just returning to Dylan's question, what impact did it have on you, lockdown?
It had a very poor effect to begin with, because I broke lockdown. Back in March, my mother passed away. We said goodbye to her on St. Patrick's Day. She was 93, so you might think, you know, good innings and all that, but actually, because they've been around so long, we're selfish people. We wanted more. Family wanted more. And then I had some personal issues and made some very poor decisions, which I regret, because it's poor leadership from a politician. It wasn't good for the reputation of the Assembly, but the biggest impact, I think, was I was very disappointed with myself. Really disappointed, and remain disappointed with myself for making very poor decisions. So it did have an impact on me.
How did you deal with that then? personally beyond other media attention that may have received? How did you deal with that on your own terms?
I think you just resolve to say, don't do that again. I mean, you can explain it to the cows come home, but you can never, ever, ever excuse it. So just take your medicine, learn your lesson, and determine to not disappoint yourself in future. In terms of the second part of the question, does it affect young people differently? I suppose the danger there is that you make a sweeping generalization and consider all young people to be the same. But thinking back to when I was young, if you'd said to me as a young person, you can't do something for a week or a month, that would have seemed like an eternity. Yeah. Whereas when you get to my advanced years, a week isn't really that big.
The time has flown. Yeah, I feel like it's
that big a task. But then, when I was growing up, I hated Sundays because basically your choice on a Sunday was you can go to church or you can not go to church. But you can't go to the pub because the pubs were shut. You can't go to the play park because the swings were tied up. And that's all changed. But against that, young people today have social media, which can be brilliant, but can also be incredibly destructive. And if you're stuck at home, in isolation, in lockdown, and social media has turned on you, I can't imagine how much more difficult that is than in normal circumstances when it is already a huge burden. And the other wee points I've ever made, Chris makes a great point, I think, about the difference between physical and mental health. Because if you're a young person, say you're at school, and you're told that one of your classmates hasn't been around all week because they broke their arm, but they'll be back on Monday. Your instinct when they arrive on Monday is to rush up to them. What happened to you? Can I sign your plaster? What can I do for you? But if you're told the person coming back on Monday has been off with mental health, whatever you do, stay back. Don't mention it.
Yeah.
Why? When 1 in 4 people is likely to have an episode during their lifetime, why are we saying a broken arm's okay, but a broken mind isn't? We have to wise up about that and realise this is a common ailment, just like a broken limb.
Yeah. I guess one of the main things, just back to this question again about the aspect for young people, particularly during lockdown, has been the impact on exams and education. I mean, that's one thing that we can all specifically say affects young people. I don't know how I personally would have coped with that kind of unknown pressure if you're doing GCSEs or A-levels and the results are the way, or they may be selected this year. What do you think about that? Do you think that's impacted young people particularly in a different way? Is it a lot of stress? How would you have coped with that scenario?
Probably not well. And when you're hearing teachers would have had to sort of roughly guess how
and
well
it's not
you're
easy
be.
For them either.
It's not easy for them either. And then all I would be thinking is, did I annoy that teacher during, or what teachers did I annoy and who did I get on best with? And all those sort of stressing, and then comparing to what your friends done and comparing to what people in your house achieved as well. So it's a tough one, and they're not in a classroom, or they're not in amongst people who are dealing with the same issues. They're in the house, maybe away from their friends. And as much as social media and technology in general has been great during this for people to connect, it's still not the same as a personal interaction. So it would be tough. I wouldn't cope too well with that, I don't think. It's
funny that you say that too, because you see most people when they graduate or they get results, and if they're good results, they tend to post them. You only really see the positive stuff on social media. You don't always get to see the negatives. So maybe that has an impact on young people too.
Yeah, well, I heard the education minister say that they were relying on teachers because teachers would know the pupils best. And I get that argument, but what I would say was that a few years ago when some people were saying, instead of having the 11 plus or whatever you call it now, the AQE or whatever, rely on the teachers making the assessment of where the children can go. The teachers were 100% against it. 100% against it. So, there's a bit of inconsistency in there. And I actually go further, Tori. I think the entire exam system is wrong, because what you're asked to do in an exam is sit on your own. And, if this was an exam hall and I was looking at your work and I was seen, I'd be thrown out.
It would probably all be wrong if you were looking at mine, to be honest.
Okay. Chris's work. You're so modest. But you know what I mean? The last thing you're supposed to do is work outside of your own little bubble. Yeah. But if you're going to go and work for the BBC and you don't cooperate with your colleagues,
so you think there should be a...
Name me any other work. Chris plays GAA. I mean, if he won't pass the ball, So the exam setup where you're on your own is absolutely counterintuitive to the way we expect people to live their lives. So I take it a lot broader than that. And if we're going to have new norms, I think this is an opportunity to say, is actually sitting people down to sit exams the way to make value judgments about them that can affect them and their mental health and their prospects for the rest of their lives.
Okay. That's maybe a question for another day, but let's go back let's go back on to these questions. So this one comes from Corey Burns. This is question number 2. They ask, the Active Communities Network found that 72% of young people said not participating in sport had a negative effect on their mental health. Do you believe physical activity is important for individuals to have positive mental health? Now, Chris, I have to come to you first on this one. Obviously, what do you think?
Massive. And like I've played sport my whole life, from the age of 5 playing for St. Gall's, and then was lucky enough to go on and play for Antrim for near 12 years. So the benefits of sport, and in particular team sports, little do you know, there's already a support network around you between managers, teammates, and if you're all going for the same goal, they all care about you deep down. But not even so much sport, just physical activity. When I was going through sort of rough patch, after the passing of my dad, a few years, I took and even still now, I enjoy walking. People think, oh, it's a sport, you have to go into a mad training session or see a mad workout on Instagram, to be the whole, sometimes just putting your earphones in and going for a walk. The hardest thing for people is probably the thought of it. You're always like, oh, it's raining or I can't be bothered, but you never regret it. You always feel better after it. And, when I was suffering with depression and anxiety, I tried counselling, medication through my GP and CBT counselling also. But there's already a ready-made drug there that was free and so, easy to access. Is physical activity. So I place a big emphasis on it still. And with so many places now to go, to walk, to do whatever it may be. So it would be a massive thing for me. Sport's
obviously been like a big part of your life for a long time, but Órlaithí, what about for people who necessarily wouldn't be, they wouldn't have had sport as such a big factor of their lives? It's difficult sometimes, isn't it, for people to start from, nowhere really. How do you make those small changes? Should you be jumping straight into a gym membership? What kind of things do you think?
It's probably meant to be that you came to me next there, because I have to confess, I am not big into sport, and Mike might agree with me, but when your routine, even trying to organise today and whatever, when it's as hectic as it is, and part of that might be an excuse, because Chris is right, when it's the right thing to do to go out for a walk or a run or to go to your spin class, but 9 times out of 10 you might find an excuse not to go with the weather or whatever else. But it is also hard when your routine is crazy and all over the place.
Or really thrown, where you don't know, there's no certainty there maybe.
Well, that's it. But with all that said, without a doubt, it does have a massive impact on your mental well-being. And I would encourage, and I'm speaking to myself when I'm saying this, but everybody to try and do some form of physical activity, even if it is just a small walk. Because I think the fact that whenever the lockdown came into place, the fact that one of the main pieces of advice coming out from all of the governments across the world was to try and encourage that physical activity, even if it was just out in your garden to begin with, or, out in a small walk on your street. And that speaks volumes about, the impact that lockdown may have had if people weren't trying to get out to do that wee bit of physical activity. So it is really, really important. It's probably just trying to find that motivation to make it part of your routine, but it's undoubtedly worth.
It can be daunting too, like you mentioned, about like that. People doing loads of workouts on Instagram and they're all like sweaty and and there's these crazy moves and things, which maybe if you were new to exercise you could do yourself real damage. So there's a big pressure there, maybe. And if you see that all the time on Instagram or on social media, maybe you feel like, oh, I'm not doing well enough if I'm not trying these things.
Yeah, but I also think it doesn't have to be sport. It could be music, could be dance. I mean, in my terms, I owe my whole life to sport. As you know, my sort of dirty little confession is at primary school, in any test, I would come 23rd out of 24. I mean, you could bet your mortgage on it. Couldn't make either of the football teams, didn't play a musical instrument, couldn't sing. And the big embarrassment was I couldn't swim, which meant for the weekly swim, they made you wear this one-piece red Borat-style mankini. Now, this was the days before human rights for children. Okay. So I went up to big school, you know, with no expectations in life. And what happened was one Wednesday, it was so wet they cancelled the games and we were sent for a run. It turned out I could run. And it was the first time a teacher gave me to believe that maybe my natural place in life was not 23rd out of 24th. And without wishing to be too boastful, you know, 5 years after arriving at big school 23rd out of 24th, I left with an Irish Schools Athletics Vest in one hand and an invitation to study at Cambridge University in the other, because of sport. Now, there's a guy called Professor Ken Robinson, and if you put him in your search engine, look for a little 10-minute animated video about education, because he talks about the element. Every child has an element inside them. Sport may bring it out. Dance may bring it out, playing a musical instrument may bring it out, acting on stage may bring it out. So we put all this emphasis on your academic ability in a classroom, but actually the way to find the spark inside a child may be different. And sport is undoubtedly one of the biggest arenas where you can find and develop the person who you want to be. So in terms of 72%, we should be talking to the other 28%. And trying to find out why they don't recognise why sport is so important and physical and mental health go together, because the science is all there.
And see, just on that, Tori, because Chris had made the point when he was speaking as well, Mike saying about the physical and mental health coming together when you're taking part in sport or physical activity. And you were saying, Chris, about, you know, the coaches, and then, you know, so when young people are going to play a sport, and that's a good thing and should be encouraged, but what should also be encouraged is you know, the appropriate training for the coaching staff, you know, if it's, you know, for the swim instructor, if it's for the GA coach or whatever it is, because it's great when that young person or anyone of any age makes that decision to join a sport and to join a team and to join a club. But what's also just as important is if you do have that black cloud over your head, and that your coaches and your peers are able to pick that up, because that can be, you know, the difference between life and death for some people.
And there's apps now that you know, easy access. I know clubs and teams that would use them. So like, you know, if you turn up, you know, it's easy to turn up and just go to the manager, I'm not fit, or my leg's sore, or go to a physio. You know, they've no real way of telling that. They've apps now where they can ask you how you slept, how did your day go, how did the night before go. You know, people
takes consideration of lots of different
factors.
Well,
I mean,
that
if someone turns up and
performance.
they're going off in one at training, or they're just not at it, they don't know what you know they're going through. They might have had an argument with a partner. They might have had a falling out with someone in work. Something might have went wrong in work. So I think it's just being, as Órlaithí said, you know, educating the coaches too, because that might be their safe area where they're going, and that's where, you know, they're going to excel. You know, they might be a good runner, and they're like, you know, that's me out of the house for that hour. I don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z, what's going on in my personal life, and that's where I can, you know, express myself. So I think, you know, education around coaches and trainers and stuff is vital too.
They have such a big role to play.
Massive.
In that vicinity.
They mould you. Like, you know, if anyone ever asked me, you know, how did you get into the sports, it would be my teachers in La Salle school. You know, they were the ones, you know, through different sports, you know, backing you and encouraging you and whatever it may be. Although they did tell me to stop playing hurling and just concentrate on doing goals, because I started to enjoy not chasing after people and enjoyed just standing there. So they give me that bit of advice, so I can't knock them for that.
Alrighty, let's move on to question number 3 on that point, all right? So this one comes from Ethan Deary. The question is, the ACN's research showed that self-esteem, self-worth and self-confidence dropped in young people who completed the consultation. Why do you think this is? Mike, I'm going to come to you first. That's quite a wide-ranging spectrum.
I think this is the most difficult question so far, because I don't think we have enough knowledge about the survey and the individuals. But I suppose, again, as a sort of generalization, while it is good to spend some time on your own and some time thinking about yourself, there has to be a balance there. And if you're in lockdown, you're probably spending, I think there's a danger you're spending too much time self-contemplating. And, if you're honest about yourself, we're all imperfect human beings, and maybe the imperfections get blown out of proportion because you are spending too much time.
And you maybe don't have like a bouncing board, like your peers to kind of question
you've
things
got,
off.
You've got social media, which I think is really imperfect, particularly for something like analysis.
Yes, yeah.
If you want to get a message out, social media is great. A lot of journalists, a lot of politicians will use Twitter, and if it's a simple message like, stay indoors, stay safe, save the NHS, that's perfect. But if you're actually trying to have some sort of intellectual depth to an argument, it's an awful medium, awful, and so open to misinterpretation and to being dominated by people who are simply out to abuse.
Yeah. It's very difficult to maybe, that face-to-face interaction with your friends for that kind of reassurance or confidence can, when you confide in them and they give you their honest opinion on something. If you don't have that, maybe there's a possibility you may overthink, especially if you're spending an awful lot of time on your own.
Yeah, and they also say, I think, that particularly young people go on social media to say what a great life they're having, and it's not a true reflection. So if you're sitting in lockdown and you're seeing all your friends and all these peers, people your own age, pretending they're having a great time, of course it's going to get you down.
Because you might think you're not doing lockdown correctly, but there's no right or wrong way to do lockdown.
What's wrong with me when they're all having a great time and I'm not?
Yeah, that's quite difficult as well. What do you think? I know you mentioned it earlier on, Órlaithí, about more people turning to the online world of interactions. Do you think you get that same interaction over a Zoom call or a Skype or on your FaceTime or whatever it is that you do? Can that fill the gap of, we're sitting here, granted socially distanced, but can that fill that void? Do you get the same level of interaction?
No, I don't think you can. And I'm actually laughing when we were coming into the car park and I met Chris. The first thing I says was I like to hug people whenever I see them, that interaction and close contact and whatever, and you don't get that through Zoom. You certainly don't get it through social media or
virtual
Facebook or Twitter. It's been virtual hugs for the past couple of months. But no, and just on Ethan's question, it's important to say as well that if young people are out there, well, the ones obviously that fed back into this consultation and they're feeling this dip in their self-worth and their self-confidence. Again, I think it's important to say that that's okay, because do you know what? I feel the same. I'm sure all of us feel the same. Lockdown has affected us all, and because we have missed that personal, close contact with family and friends, it's important to remind people that that's okay. It's not because you're a young person that you may be feeling that way. It's trying not to give yourself that much, a big part of the time over it, because we're all feeling the repercussions.
You're not alone in that.
Well, that's it. And that's the whole point. But the issue around, I would worry that because I suppose with the lockdown, and obviously we've still been up at Storm Mountain with the health committee, none of that work stopped, but you were at home, much more outside of that. But see, with the issue around the social media and our young people in general, the issue really terrifies me. I done a talk with St. Louise's a couple of months ago. It was obviously prior to the lockdown. And I had met with these it was actually with girls and boys. And the whole conversation came back to this issue about their self-confidence and their self-esteem. And after us talking it through, 9 times out of 10, it was coming back to, because whenever they were going home at nights, when even in school, when the teachers were laughing in the room saying, you're not meant to be on, but it was the social media that they are so connected to their Facebook, their Instagram, and again, not just young people, we all are. But what I had said to the group of kids that day was, whenever I was that age, that young, precious age in your primary school years, in your high school years, even in your university years, we didn't have social media. And it really is an issue that I don't know how we'll fix it, but it's one that we need to definitely try and protect our young people more by building their resilience and building their hope, and I don't know, trying to build in better strategies about how you deal with the world of social media. But it's hard for adults and children alike.
It is really difficult because I think I was maybe starting university when Instagram and things like that started, and I love a wee Instagram, hook around, like who doesn't like a wee nosy, but it can get overwhelming, and it's difficult though to like, you have to kind of tell yourself, right, no, enough's enough, I'm putting it away now. And that's hard. Most of the time at the minute, it's my mum telling me to put it to this. She's like, you're never off that phone. But, it's difficult if you don't have...
And that it's not the real world.
Yes, exactly.
I said to the kids that day too. I was like, never feel if you see a photograph of someone whose life seems much happier than yours, whose family seems happier, a girl or boy that looks
or their
more
skin's
beautiful
perfectly
or more
flawless,
handsome, because it's not real life. And that I think that's what we need to keep reminding people about. I have to remind myself some days too. It's not real life.
How do you do that? What is there a massive culture change needed then in terms of like our attitude? Because you can see that, if your self-esteem, your self-worth and self-confidence, if you do see a lot of those things online that people are living this wonderful life, they would take a hit. I mean, that's bound to happen.
Definitely. And I think even during lockdown in particular, you probably find yourself, you get the wee reminder each week of how much you're on your phone, screen time, which horrifies you, daily.
Hours.
You're like, what? You're wanting to slap yourself nearly. But it's, we've so much access now to like celebrities' lives too. You're on Instagram, you're friends with Cristiano Ronaldo. You're seeing him like, and it is, I think, wondering how, like, then you're like, going, and this even from, you're like, how's he in that shape? And this is like, you have to just remind yourself that they're professional athletes, these pro athletes that live this lifestyle, and, with social media influencers, fitness people as well, I'm not even so sure how qualified they are, advising people what to eat or not to eat. You hear like, I've heard people come off with statements like, no carbs for a month and all, like, silly statements. And, but an audience is going, God, she has 800,000 followers.
Or
God,
likes and followers is a big thing, which we never had to deal with really.
No,
most of
talking about social media, the biggest one was like, you used to run home after school to get on MSN Messenger, or share the love on Beidh was the biggest thing, and you had a Nokia 3310 that you were addicted to playing Snake on it. Like it all has just changed. Where like you rely so much on like a square in your pocket. Like your whole life is there. Your bank and everything.
And did you beat Ronaldo at Snake?
No, I didn't beat Ronaldo. I was trying to work out like over lockdown how could you get in that sort of shape, but I think even people as well, like, they've no access to gyms. They might be coming out of lockdown, maybe feeling a bit, maybe not as much exercise, maybe a bit more weight on. Obviously that'll affect self-esteem, self-confidence, but it's just
Or even training. I train in a gym, but I train like with a class.
Yeah.
I'm the worst in the class, but I enjoy that camaraderie of, you you maybe do something better than you did like a month ago, and they go, "Whoa, that's great, Tori," or and that's quite nice. It's a teeny tiny thing. I'll never make the Olympics or anything, but it's a nice feeling that somebody kind of gives you that boost.
Definitely.
I guess the other flip side of the social media thing, and Mike touched on it before, is if you post something out there, it's nice that people like it, but you also have that flip side of people might just take it upon themselves to be negative for no reason, just because that's what they like to do. And that can have a huge impact, especially whenever you're isolated. And if one of my friends posted something and somebody wrote something negative under it, I'd be like, just forget it. But it's easy for me to say to my friend, but it's not easy when you don't have that face-to-face.
Yeah, and sometimes, so there are people out who just want to cause offence or want to have a go at you. But also sometimes, 2 or 3 times I have tweeted without thinking it through. I know what I mean, but actually when you look at it, you can interpret it 2 or 3 different ways.
And tricky with small characters and things as well, character numbers.
It is, I don't know.
It's a minefield.
Luckily I wouldn't, I think from I sort of went public about speaking about, my own struggles and putting it out there through the GA. I think I had one bad comment, but for one bad comment, there's X amount of good out of it. So I wouldn't obviously see some of the stuff online towards, politicians too. It's shocking. At the end of the day, the people must think that they're, they're robots, but
they must be perfect.
Or politicians as well have to go home to families, and other halves and friends are reading that about them. So it's, I don't know what goes through, honestly, people's heads when they're thinking, I'm going to abuse this person, or I'm going to troll this person, as they're called. And it's usually faceless people. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of talk about, if you're going to sign up to social media, you should be able to
be accountable in some way.
You should be able to put your passport in, or your driving license number, or whatever it may be, that is him, and you can't make up all these fake accounts or whatever it may be just to get at people. So it's
I agree.
It's a strange old one. I just don't know what goes through people's heads.
Because the trolling as well. I mean, the topic that we're talking about is mental health, and trolling and abuse on social media has led to people taking their own lives. I've dealt with some families, some horrific stories. I'm talking about kids at still at school, and they felt that was their only option. And Chris is right. And I mean, me and Mike are two elected MLAs. Chris has a high profile and coming out and speaking about, his background story and all the rest. And my advice to anyone out there, and any young person or child, if you are getting any online abuse, my advice, what I try to do, is do not internalize it, because the people that are at the other end are absolutely not worth it. So why even waste? Don't waste your time, don't waste your energy, don't waste your emotions, and don't waste your good mental health on people that feel that that's the way that they want to behave. It's easier said than done at times, but it's just trying not to internalize
particularly if they're anonymous, or it's MCN 19798.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned to just block. I mean, I believe in freedom of speech, but it's not an absolute.
Yeah.
And for the sake of my own mental health, I would rather just say,
Fill
your boots.
On the point you raised, this next question, our fourth question of the day, comes from Jeglan Burns. As we all know, suicide is one of the main causes of death in young people in Northern Ireland. What changes do you think government can make to ensure the mental health crisis here doesn't get any worse than it currently is? Now, Mike, I'm going to come to you first on this one. And I know that there was an interim mental health champion appointed by the Health Minister, Robin Swan. So obviously there's a move there to potentially tackle the issue, but what more can be done?
Well, I'm delighted Siobhan O'Neill has taken that position, and I mean, self-praise is no recommendation, but this was, when I was unionist leader, that was my call, that we have a mental health champion, because I think it sends out a very, very strong signal to people who are suffering from mental health and to communities, because I think, first of all, we treat poor mental health and we treat suicide as a medicalised model, and we think that pills and tablets are the way to do it. Pills and tablets have their place, particularly with poor mental health. There are times where a medicalised solution is at least part of the fix, but it's not the whole thing. So look, we all have friends, we all have family. We can all meet a person that we know pretty well and go, something wrong with you today. You're not yourself. You're not acting the way. And that's, I think, in terms of change, what we need. We need people in the community who know the members of the community well enough to be able to say, something wrong with Tori today, or I want to keep an eye on Chris. I'm not quite happy about his,
doesn't seem himself.
Yeah, that old attitude. He's not himself today. And then you can intervene with kind of social models. You don't have to be going to hospital. You don't have to be taking medication. And that's just, to me, too easy a fix. And then what I would see the mental health champion doing is what the Victims Commissioner does, the Older Persons Commissioner does, what Nikki does. They look at, for example, what Órlaithí and I are doing in terms of legislation at Stormont. They look at a bit of legislation and say, well, does that have an effect potentially on people with poor mental health that they haven't thought through, unintended consequences? They review services. And again, it wouldn't just be the services provided by the health trusts. We'd be saying, do we have enough people on the ground? Perhaps, actually, one of the person who helped my wife the most when she wasn't well was the community psychiatric nurse. Nothing to do with medicine. Sat down in the kitchen, had a cup of tea and said, look, for you to get better, you have to go on a journey from here to here. The two things you need to know. You're not the first to have to make that journey. A lot of people have done it. And secondly, you're not going on your own. I'm going to walk with you. That makes a huge, huge difference. And I say not one tablet is taken on board. There's no risk of becoming dependent on prescribed medicines. So the way I would change it is to normalise it, and where possible to make it a non-medical process and solution. Because I think that I know that works. So it's social interaction. It's having people who understand the individual, are empathetic to the individual, and understand what to do. If it's only to signpost. If it's only to signpost them to people who have the special skills that are required.
It can be difficult to have those conversations though, and I know, Chris, we've talked about that before, but since you have come forward and relayed your story, have you noticed that people are more likely now to approach you, people that you maybe didn't think would ever have considered maybe approaching you before, but do you feel like they have maybe come to you and had those kind of more difficult, tricky conversations?
Yeah, the big thing for me, and as I said earlier, was most people either have or will lose a parent at some stage. So a lot of people were coming to me saying that they felt that when they read what I had wrote, that it was them writing it. You know, it happened to them 20 years ago, or it happened to them, 5 years ago, whatever it may be. So I think it hits home more when it's strangers coming to the ear. And I always say to them, like, I'm not an expert. This is just a shared experience that most people either have or will go through. And it's just to highlight that it's okay to go and ask for help. You don't have to, as I tried for a while, act the big lad. You don't have to take it all on yourself. It's not a sign of weakness to keep it all to yourself. And especially in around meals, it seems to be a big issue around meals. And I'm sitting in between two females, but I have to be careful how I word it. But girls are, talk easier to friends, they talk easier to sisters, and they're good at getting things off their chest better than fellas. I know, initially it'd just be like, if people asked, how are you? You'd be like, I'm grand. No one really, as you said earlier, no one really follows that up. You don't really go, is he grand? It's just how is your day? How's things going on? And it's I think a lot of people always, you hear just like being completely neutral as well, be like, politicians need to do more, and this needs to happen, and what are they doing up in Stormont? And that's just people on the street that, you realise how much people are actually trying to help. They're trying to implement things behind closed doors just because it isn't broadcasted, but there's things going on behind closed doors where they're, mental health action plan, Siobhan being appointed as the, mental health ambassador. So, it's becoming more and more normal. And as Mike's saying, everyone, even in this room, you have someone who you think, do you know what, I can go to him or her, I can go and speak to them and get that off my chest, because sometimes you might need medical intervention or to see a GP or a counsellor. It might just be getting something off your chest that's been bugging you at work or been bugging you in your private life, and you'll always feel better for it. And it's a problem shared is a problem halved, and not that you're going to worry that other person, but they're going to be like, I'll check in on Chris or Leah or Mike, and and I think that they're making it more normal in workplaces. Even mental health first aid is a big thing. Something that I
some people,
myself.
I guess, on that point in like mental health in a workplace, I guess some people would be a bit worried, that they would then be, well, that person doesn't have good mental health, and they would be, kind of like segregated as a result of that.
I found it, well, even just having a good way about you, it doesn't have to be you're going up and diagnosing someone. I think it's just even, you're in the kitchen making tea with, you've seen someone's maybe had a heavy weekend with social media, and it's just, just checking in, like.
You remind me, sorry, Órlaithí, before you come in, you just remind me, Chris, there was a piece of research the Department of Education did a little while ago, and what they discovered was, to my mind, a shocking percentage of school pupils said they would not go to a teacher if they had a mental health issue to discuss it, but they would go to a peer. Mm-hmm. And so we now see in some schools the start of this, as well as having obviously responsible teachers that you can go to, you're having peers, fellow school children from your own year group who are being trained up. And again, they're not
And then they can
counsellors,
refer up, yeah.
but they're people that you trust to go to say, look, I'm feeling crap today.
Yeah.
And they know how to respond and they know how to signpost. And I think that's really important. And you need it in the workplace as well. You need that more informal, as it were. And I can understand why, you know, if you're 15, you're not going to go to an adult teacher. You're going to much more easily go to your mate and say, you know what, I'm really down.
Yeah.
Sorry, interrupt.
Okay. Well, do you want me just to follow on from that, Tori? Because, see, I think the big thing that's been spoke about, and obviously that we do know that in this part of the world that we live, we, you know, this talk about a mental health crisis is nothing new, because ashamedly our suicide rates, as we all know, have been historically high for a number of different reasons. Mike talked earlier on about, you know, we live in a post-conflict society, the high rates of you know, drug and alcohol addiction, deprivation, all the rest, and that's only tipping the iceberg, because it's such a complex issue, because you might have none of them things or all of them, and it might be something as simple as falling out with your partner or your family member. It's just one of these issues. It's so complex. At times it can be difficult to try and look at it in the whole to understand. But see, two of the biggest deterrents, right, that prevent people from seeking help is one, an internalised stigma. So, you know, you're in your own self-denial that you might have a mental health problem or a mental health illness. And the second one is stigma around receiving treatment. So no, I can't be seen to go to the doctors and talk about mental health. I can't go into that, you know, suicide awareness, so that suicide support group. And those two big pillars are still the reason why it is stigma. That is why we do have, you know, the rates of suicide are still so high. That's why mental illness is the largest cause of ill health. You know, unfortunately, that's why in this constituency that we're in West Belfast and North Belfast, you're 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than, you know, other parts of the North. And when you think of them statistics, it's so frightening. I hate even saying the word statistics, because it's people's lives and they're still losing their lives every single day because of this issue. But the Mental Health Action Plan, brilliant. Now working towards a 10-year mental health strategy that we haven't had before, amazing. A 10-year funding package, again, we haven't had that before, so this is all the stuff we're working towards. The perinatal mental health was also mentioned in Robin Swan's action plan. And again, the perinatal mental health, and that's one aspect that we haven't touched on yet. So perinatal mental illness, for anyone that doesn't know, is when throughout pregnancy or after pregnancy, you suffer from a mental health problem, or it can, you know, lead into severe mental illness. But again, the largest cause of maternal deaths is suicide. And on the island of Ireland, north or south, we have no mother and baby inpatient unit where a mummy can go in to a unit to get mental health support with her baby. We have not got that. It's shocking. We haven't got specialised perinatal mental health services in all of the 5 trusts. We only have it in 1 trust. So this is all the wee things. This is not the wee things. This is the big things that are contained within the action plan, that are going to be contained within the strategy. But you know what? You can still have all of those things and more. See us as individuals and as a society and as friends and as family and as work colleagues. If we aren't in tune with caring about each other's feelings and picking up on someone's feelings when they're feeling down, then you're always going to be at a losing battle and maybe saving someone's life if they're at that dark place.
Yeah, and Declan's question was, well, what changes could government make? I think in terms of suicide, we have a strategy called Protecting Life 2, and what I would change is the target. In fact, really, I can't even remember what the target is. So it's 10% over, 5 years, something like that. And we are told that that's based on the World Health Organization guidelines. But those guidelines are for normal societies. In terms of suicide, this is a very abnormal society. And the only target you can possibly stand over is 0. Now, you might be able to get there, but how can you say 1 suicide is acceptable? How could the health minister stand up in 5 years and say we have achieved our target of a reduction by 10%, when there will be families watching that minister on television thinking we've just buried our child? So the change I would make is, and yes, it would be aspirational and it will take huge effort and we might never actually get there, zero suicides has to be the only acceptable target.
So is there a wider driver there in terms of cultural change, in terms of not being afraid to ask someone, how they're doing and checking in, and not be afraid to ask the wrong question, because there is no such thing as the wrong question in terms of how are you doing?
Yeah, and it's maybe one of the products of this public health crisis is that, emails now tend to finish with things like stay safe. We're now...
It's the small things.
Yeah, how are you getting on? How's lockdown going for you? Maybe that's the start of the sort of change that we need to address mental health issues.
And the big thing as well, Tori, is to get to the zero that Mike's talking about, it's the prevention. And you're not, unfortunately, going to save everyone's life. That should be the goal and the target. But it's just life can get so complex and complicated for a million different reasons. But see the prevention when we're talking about, starting off in our schools and teaching. There's a pilot called Schools for Hope that they've started piloting some of our post-primary schools. And there was actually research done that says that hope is a teachable skill. So if you can't start off too young, even infant mental health, see, even whenever a baby is in the womb, there is work being done around how, and that brings in the perinatal mental health. If you look after the mummy with the baby in her womb, the baby, from that wee baby's born, then into nursery, primary school, with teaching the hope and the resilience, with all those good support networks, with your GAA clubs and your trainers trained up in suicide prevention. It is that holistic approach, and you can't do enough of it. So I know that there probably is frustrations because, and rightfully so, because our suicide rates are still so high. I think it was 307 or 308 people died in 2018, and you're always a year behind in your statistics. But so it's not good enough. But I think even if everyone that's listening to this panel discussion takes one thing away, it's just check in on your nearest and dearest and your friends, or even a stranger in the street. If you give a smile, that whole thing around being kind and, just trying to help each other. And then obviously at government level, we still need to do all the heavy lifting with the schools and the prevention and all the rest.
I know we're tight for time and we could talk about this. I mean, there's so many different aspects that we've already covered, but we could talk for days on end. But before we wrap up, I just want to run around just the table and just ask what advice you would give to people who are maybe struggling at the minute. Just a brief, some brief guidance. Mike, I'll start with you.
Don't hide it would be my advice. I think it would probably glib to say speak to a friend or a colleague, because maybe you don't feel, not everybody feels that they've got one, but I think the great majority, if they think about it, can probably identify somebody they could speak to. And if there isn't a friend or a family member you can talk to, then you've got the health service to interchange with. Don't hide it. Don't think you're special. Don't think that it's something wrong that you have to be ashamed of. It's nothing different from breaking your arm, walking down the street and tripping over. It's normal, it's natural, and in 99.9% of cases, like a broken arm, it can be fixed.
Chris?
Yeah, same. Don't be keeping it in. Don't be making mountains out of molehills. Making that out something starts off so small can escalate. I think keeping it to yourself is, the wrong thing to do. As Mike touched on, everyone will have someone that they can speak to, that can go, I can go to him. And even if you're not in that position, sort of pick them out in your head, or even give them a heads up before that, if I'm struggling, you're who I'm coming to. And it's not putting pressure on that person, but it's just letting them know that, you're there to help. You always hear on, speaking on social media quite a bit that, you hear people saying it's a catchy hashtag, it's okay not to be okay, but it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And if you've tried many of things, speaking to friends, there's helplines there. Sometimes speaking to a complete stranger and getting it off your chest can be just what you need. You're not being, people, Órlaithí spoke about, it being internal. So we're going, God, am I saying this out loud to someone I know? And you're thinking, you could go away and think they could be thinking, what's he talking about? Or you could be just creating something again in your own head. Where if you speak to a stranger, you know, they have no affiliation to you, and it just might be what you need at that time. So it's just for people who are struggling, and if you know someone who is struggling, to, you know, just simply ask, talk, and listen to people around you. So that's basically it.
And Órlaithí.
Yeah, I suppose it would just be that, like, just to say to anyone out there who might be struggling that, you know, don't be ashamed. And the reality is that life is really hard. It's really hard for everyone at different times throughout your journey. And we all have our good days. We all have our bad. And that's okay if you're feeling how you're feeling. But just know that there's always hope. And that there is always someone there to help. And if you don't have it in your close family or friend circle, if you don't have it with your colleagues, and if you need that help and that support, then ring the Lifeline number. You know, speak to someone. There's always someone out there who will try and help you, but just try and, you know, not be hard on yourself, and just remember that this is, you know, our good days and bad days is all part of life, and just reach out and try and get the help and support that you need.
Thank you all so much for being so open and answering our questions so well. That brings to a conclusion our virtual Féile Youth Talks Back event. Thank you ever so much again to our panellists for joining, and most of all, thank you to you for joining us virtually online.